In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. This one by Mattingly. Oh, hang on to the roof. Goodbye, home run. Don Mattingly. Taco makes one. Deep left field. Down the line. That's going out of here. Out of
Welcome back to another episode of Tablesetters, covering all things Major League Baseball. As always, I'm Steve, joined by my tag team partner, Devin. What's up, dude?
What's going on, man? I got to share this with you. So baseball season is obviously over, but there's still these little remnants coming up that are left over. Before bedtime, I was watching MLB Network, and a little montage of the New York Mets came up with the "Oh my God" in the background, and my two sons stopped immediately what they were doing and said, "Dada, it's Oh my God, turn it up." And they had no idea really that it's so baseball related, but they're obsessed with that song still, and I think that's going to go on for months and months, maybe lead into the next season.
Well, what a good segue. Today we open the show with our guest, Keith Raad, the play-by-play broadcaster for the New York Mets on WCBS 880. Of course, Keith works beside Mets Hall of Famer Howie Rose, bringing you all the action and insight on Mets baseball. You guys can follow Keith on X at Keith_Rad. That's 2 A's in Rad, and catch all the Mets broadcasts all season long. And Keith, it's a pleasure to have you on. How are you doing tonight?
Really good, guys. Really good to talk to you. I got a chance to not do anything for a little while, and now it's time to get into the off season because rest is only for the weary here.
It's such a pleasure to have you on. We have so much to break down, of course, the season that was and the season that will be in 2025. But before we get into all things New York Mets, tell us a little about your journey into baseball broadcast. We know you spent some time over in Coney Island, and how did you first get started in the industry, and what steps did you take to get to your current role as the voice of the Mets on WCBS 880?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think about. I still pinch myself because I still feel like the little broadcaster that started out in college, 10 years ago with a dream to make it to the major leagues. Just finished up year number 2 with the Mets, but it was about nine and a half years in the minor leagues. After I graduated from college, I worked for the Dayton Dragons, which is the Cincinnati Reds affiliate, Single A. And when you do these jobs, these minor league jobs, it's random cities, very low pay. And when you get these jobs, it's, hey, you have to fall in love with the Cincinnati Reds because you're now talking to an audience of people that are big Reds fans. So I did that. Then I did the Long Island Ducks, independent ball, totally different beast. From that, I went to Frisco, Texas, did AA for the Texas Rangers. That was another beast, another level of baseball. Learned a whole lot. One of the big things I learned in Texas, the team was outside of Dallas. So I learned about basically how to crack into a market, how to get in touch with the right people and do the right things to get to where you want to go. And from that, I learned about basically just get to the city you want and try to make the connections there. And so I went from AA to, at the time, short season A Brooklyn, which was the Cyclones, which was some people would said, what the heck are you doing? Why are you going to not even low A, but even lower than that? But I spent what was 5 years in Brooklyn. One of them was the COVID year. Still was working, still was checking fever foreheads of Jerry Blevins and other Mets at the alt site. But it was 5 years in Brooklyn, 2 as short season and 2 as high A. And then, the Mets job opened up and I just thought, hey, maybe this is the time. And it was the time.
Well, as a Mets fan, I can say we're happy to have you, and we're glad it worked out that way. You've had the opportunity, obviously, as Steve mentioned, to work alongside the great Howie Rose. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to work with him and anything you've learned along the way these last 2 years.
Yeah, I've learned so much from him. I mean, first of all, he's a legend, and you would never really know it when you meet him. The only way you would know that he's a legend is because he's hilarious. He commands a room when the microphone's off and people are just in the broadcast booth, hanging out with us, friends, saying hello. He's amazing. He's a storyteller, and so you're just kind of sitting back listening. And I just find myself when we're having dinner before the game, say something because you're in a conversation. But I'm just like feel like I'm listening to the radio when I talk to Howie Rose. But if I go back and listen to what I sounded like, April and May of year 1 and to what I sound like now, you can definitely tell the Howie Rose influence has draped itself over me in a really good way. And that's the best part about this. That's the most fulfilling part about this for him too, is that certainly my broadcast level was major league ready, but the things that he has done to make it even better, to bring my attention to certain things that I just was not aware of. or how to tell the story even better. That's what working with him has enabled me to do. And it's nuts. We do game after game after game, and all of a sudden you're in Milwaukee, and now it's the 9th inning, and you've just done so many innings, and all of a sudden it's 1st and 3rd. The season's on the line. Here comes Pete Alonso, and in the next 5 minutes, Howie Rose had another call for the ages, and it's just crazy. I was sitting next to the guy as he makes this call, and you're just living in the moment of this Pete Alonso home run, and then you sit back and you go, "Did that just happen?" And then the aftermath of all that was amazing. He got his flowers, which he deserved. He got him on the plane. He got him on social media. So he's the complete package, and he's a great guy, Howie Rose.
That's fantastic to hear. And Devin, you mentioned the OMG Grimace Mets to start, and they've undoubtedly been one of the most talked about teams for the Mets and for MLB in recent history, and for good reason. You mentioned that moment with Pete Alonso, that Howie Rose had that magical call on it that we heard all around social media, getting his flowers. And this has been one of the most entertaining seasons that we've seen. If you had to choose just one moment, maybe it's that one with Pete Alonso that stands out as your personal favorite, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot coming down the stretch. I just, again, you do so many games, you do every single one. The Arizona game that a lot of people maybe forget about because it was the final game of that 3-game set. The Mets had just lost in San Diego on that walk-off by Jackson Merrill against Edwin Diaz in Arizona. Diaz, screws up a game late again, and you're thinking, there goes the season. I mean, they keep blowing games, and then he comes back and wins a huge pivotal day game in Arizona. That was a turning point. Certainly the Atlanta game, the doubleheader was incredible. Just the amount of travel that the Mets had gone through. And I think a lot of people might, as they look back on last year, with all the things that happened, the doubleheader that happened, to be honest with you, the fact that the weather delayed those games, the hurricane delayed those games, that may have saved the Mets season, because the Mets walked into Atlanta with pressure. They felt the pressure. They lost that first game. And there was that feeling that JD Martinez talked about this, that you could tell it just weighed on them. And then the hurricane comes in, 2 games get rained out. We go to Milwaukee, we come back, and the Mets kind of rejuvenated themselves. And I think that first game was an instant classic. And again, another game that you're just doing. And all of a sudden you're like, Atlanta takes the lead. The Mets take the lead. It's just these back and forth lead changes. And then at the end of that first game where the Mets make the playoffs, the tears from Lindor, the tears from Nimmo, because of what the season was supposed to be, right? It was just a rebuild year. And it's hard to tell athletes who do this every single day. I remember most vividly, the first day of the year, opening day, first question for Nimmo. So this is a transition year for you, Brandon. What are you expecting? Basically, like, this is a wash year for the fans. You're telling this person who's about to play 162 games, none of this is about to matter. It really does matter to them. That's why I think the first game in Atlanta is probably the most impactful one that I remember from this year.
I think as a fan, that's what we want to see. I mean, these guys make so much money nowadays. As a fan, sometimes you just want to see that they genuinely care about what we're watching and what we're putting our time into as well. And I think that's why, to me, as a fan, this team seems so special, and one that we'll hold on to for a long time. Is you could tell they genuinely care a lot. And the tears that you mentioned are part of that. You also mentioned that travel at the end of the year. I got to ask you, a part of the job, obviously, is there a city that you look forward to going to more than others, or maybe even just a stadium and the atmosphere of a certain stadium?
Yeah, so I think stadium-wise, vibes-wise, Dodger Stadium is amazing. It's incredible. The views, the laid-back, chill Southern California feel, the baby blue, the history there, Chavez Ravine, driving up the hill. That's probably my favorite stadium to go to, but I think San Diego is the complete package of weather, stupid perfect weather, that you can walk to the park, which is a big plus. The park is amazing. They get 45, 50,000 a game these days. At least they sell out most of them. I love the burritos and the tacos in San Diego. Pretty cool party scene, cool beach scene. Again, like perfect weather. You wouldn't expect 68 degrees to be perfect, but when it's 68 degrees at breakfast and at dinner, just the same temperature, it's pretty sweet.
That's awesome. And yeah, San Diego gets a lot of love as far as the stadium goes. And obviously they're building up a culture of winning there. And they've been in the news cycle for a little bit with the downside of baseball not being on right now, is where you have to pick apart the minutia. And the Dodgers and the interviews post-season have been all about really the Padres, and everyone was talking about the Padres being the best team. Did you have that feeling from watching them on a, series to series basis?
Yeah, I kind of, I said this on SNY, I think, going into what was going to be potentially the NLCS, and who do you want to play, the Padres or the Dodgers? I said I'm way more scared of the Padres, and then to play the Dodgers, and they're unbelievably good, unbeatable. Really, they were that good. But even the Dodgers, like you said, Steve, is that they felt that the Padres, to a man, 1 through 26, were the best team. I definitely felt that their lineup was humming, their starting rotation was filthy, and that bullpen. I mean, I mentioned that series where the Mets had that road trip in August where they did, San Diego and then Arizona. And one day in San Diego, that when Merrill hit the home run, Mets saw arm after arm after arm. There was one kid in that back of the bullpen that didn't even make the playoff roster, throwing 100. Where do they get this guy from? So I think they were scarier. Obviously, the Dodgers, changed that.
So going with the Mets that are around for next season, Gary Cohen and other respected voices in the industry have called Carlos Mendoza a rising star in the managerial ranks. And from your perspective, being close to the team, what qualities set him apart and make him such an effective and unique leader that this team so desperately needed for a long time?
Yeah, he really was a perfect choice. I mean, I remember when his name popped up, everyone was thinking Counsell, and then I think all of us went, "Who in the heck is Carlos Mendoza?" Because that's just the reaction. But David Stearns picked the right baseball guy. Just a great, I like to say, a normal person, as in he looks you in the eye, wants to know your name, he wants to know your story, gives you the time of day, gives you he wants your 2 cents on what's going on. He can connect with anybody like that. Consistent personality is a huge thing for a manager. I remember I do a pregame interview with Carlos every single day with whatever manager the Mets have every single day. Opening day, same guy. 22 and 33, Jorge Lopez throws his glove into the crowd, same guy. Winners of 8 straight, same guy. You need that kind of consistent personality for a full baseball season. I think the fact that he's bilingual, he connects with both the American players and the Latino players. That's a huge thing. And his mix of analytics and gut. I was so hyped with how he would use his gut most of the time. He'd run out. Everybody in the world thought a pitching change was coming. He'd turn right back around and head to the dugout. You go, wow, this can still be a thing. And the way he'd construct his lineups, he played at the analytics. He played the splits. He would not get overly heavy on one or the other. And I think it just worked. He allowed players to have fun. I mean, I know there's probably an immediate comparison to, Buck Showalter and then Carlos Mendoza. Take them separately. Carlos let his guys do their thing. I mean, the bat flips, the Jesse Winker throwing his helmet all over the place, I guess. These things that he allowed these guys to do, contained, it was perfect. And it's just the beginning for Carlos.
That Severino complete game is what I think of when you think of when you mentioned Mendoza going with his gut and coming out and seeing how the guy feels. I remember he let Severino go out for the 9th. Citi Field went nuts. And then Severino let a guy get on. I can't remember if it was a walk or a base hit. But
no, he hit Jake Berger.
Oh, he hit somebody, so neither.
Perfect.
And then Mendoza comes out, and the place basically boos him for coming out because they think he's being taken out. He talks to Sevy, and he leaves him in there, and the place went nuts again, which just shows you how important letting a guy go deep into a game when they have it that day is to the casual fan and the hardcore fan. It's just we don't see it much anymore, and that just shows what Mendoza does seem to have his finger on the pulse of that kind of stuff. We got to get to the offseason now because this is what all the talk is going to be about, I guess, until there's some big signings. Ron Darling weighed in the other day about Juan Soto. They asked him how he felt about maybe the Mets trying to go get him. And he said, I don't know why, but I almost want to say no. He couldn't really explain it. And then he said, maybe we'd rather get $200-300 million players. Where do you stand on the idea of adding Juan Soto to the current mix that the Mets have? Do you think it should be their number one priority, or do you go a different route?
No, I first of all, I think Juan Soto is a future Hall of Famer. I think he's the real deal. And I think we all see that. What I think is really important, though, is to not just simply bring him in, because you are bringing him into, he's an alpha, right? A little bit of an alpha. Francisco Lindor is your alpha. He is your guy. He is your leader. He is your big dog. He signed the contract. He's basically the captain without being officially named the captain. You just have to make sure, and I think Steve Cohen and David Stearns will do that, is this going to be cool with Lindor? What kind of relationship does Soto have with Lindor? Because that is going to be huge. You don't want to bring in the best talent, but the wrong guy for the clubhouse. And I think that if they can get over that hurdle, I think most would. I think Soto is priority number one. I think Steve Cohen wants him. Steve can definitely afford him. Scott Boras knows that Steve can afford him. He's young enough. In my eyes, he's worth it. Now, the whole thing about, is it worth paying a guy all this money as one player on a baseball team? It's better than not having a superstar. And I remember talking to Steve Gelbs during the playoff run, is, when it got down to the final four teams and the Dodgers did their thing, and then in the World Series, Dodgers, Yankees, the superstars came out, right? You had Freddie Freeman going crazy. Where in the world was Aaron Judge? Without him, the Yankees weren't themselves. And the Mets, certainly they had superstars with Lindor and Alonso. Nimmo kind of faded a little bit toward the end. Plantar fasciitis got him. You need superstars in those moments, and Soto is definitely a superstar. So I'm all for bringing him in, but be careful with making sure the vibes are still good, because these are still human beings that are trying to be on the same page, and you have to make sure Soto and Lindor are on the same page.
So we were heaping praise, of course, on the 2024 season. How could we not? To capture the hearts of the fans, but they have several expiring contracts and potential roster changes. Amid all these changes, we have the team looking quite different come opening day 2025. Which of the expiring contracts do you think are most likely to return in 2025? Of course, off the top of our head, we know it's Manaea, Alonso, Harrison Bader, Iglesias. We got JD Martinez, Quintana, Stanek, Winker, Severino, and the big one hammering out there, I mentioned in the second one, is Pete Alonso. So do you have a prediction about what this team looks like and choosing who's coming back for this team?
It's so unique. I mean, they I think it's like 14 total free agents, certainly more than any other team had. The guy I'd probably say is the most lock. It's hard to pick a lock. Is Severino coming back? I say that because he absolutely loves New York City. I don't know if the Yankees want to bring him back, but I know that he would probably have interest in coming back to the Mets. I remember when he was with the Yankees, he took a fairly team-friendly deal for a young arm who threw hard because he loves New York so much, and that's why I signed with the Mets. So I think he has a more lock chance. The Pete Alonso situation is really going to be unique because, Scott Boras is his agent. Pete picked him for a reason. He wants to get the most money. Boras had a terrible offseason last offseason with his Boras 4. I guess it was slightly embarrassing with how that happened, and the whole thing with Jordan Montgomery basically firing him. So I don't know if the Mets and Pete get a deal done because, again, the Mets want to bring him back. Pete wants to be a Met, but this is business. There's a dollar figure in there. And I am still of the mind that if Pete chose Scott Boras, he wants the most. And some of the comments after the Dodgers series, I know that Juan Soto, after his thing, was all about the 30 teams, and it didn't really seem like he was upset about the season. Pete was a little more remorseful and sad the season ended, but you could tell there were some words in there that Pete mentally may be ready to hit the open market and be ready to go to a new team. I think the Mets have to be ready for that. You can't overpay for Pete Alonso at his age, at his position. You could pay for him, but I don't believe in overpaying, even if he had a really, really, really big swing in Milwaukee. Mets are smart enough to know they might have to go on with Pete Alonso.
Yeah, I've been talking about this with other Met fans for so long, and a lot of fans, rightfully so, get emotionally attached, and the idea of a lifelong Met is obviously appealing, but my concern is just the position and how that position usually ages like a power-hitting first baseman. You see the Albert Pujols of the world, even like a Miguel Cabrera and Paul Goldschmidt. It never seems to go great in the back half of that contract. The Sevy thing, too, I find interesting, thinking he might come back. I think a lot of people were surprised about the qualifying offer for him. Were you surprised to see him get the qualifying offer?
Probably not. I think it's just a formality, just a way of doing business and protect the Mets with a draft pick if he does go elsewhere. It is unique for him too. That if I were him, that's a good chunk of change. That's 21 million versus the 13 that they signed him for last year. That's a lot of money, but it's another smart deal on David Stearns' part, where pitchers want a little bit more, a few more years, a little more security. But that $21 million is, I think it's fair. I think it's, Manaea got it. Alonso got it. Severino got it. I was probably more surprised that that Severino got it, but I do know that he's not going to probably go with that and probably want something a little bit longer than one.
Manaea and Severino were two of the kind of David Stern's, I would guess we could call them like a reclamation project, where they're taking a chance on a guy that they think they can help kind of get back to finding their form on a short-term deal. Do you see David Stearns doing a lot more of that this offseason? Everyone's talking about the big ticket free agents, but David Stearns obviously has kind of a reputation of being able to kind of finding these gems out there that not everybody else is looking at. Do you expect that from him again?
Yeah, truly, I think it's really, really smart. I think that's why, David Stearns is who he is if you think about the deals that he gave out with Manaea and with Severino and with Bader, and anytime you give a 1-year deal to somebody who's coming off a year that's not so great, they are 1,000,000,000% incentivized to have the greatest year ever, to turn it on, give whatever team they're on their best, because they're trying to demonstrate what they can do for the next contract. So you get every single ounce out of that player. I mean, Harrison Bader defensively is one of the great reasons why the Mets won 89 games this year. So what Severino did, obviously we're talking about him for multi-year deals. He had a 6-something ERA with the Yankees. He thought he was finished, and he gave them everything that they had. Sean Manaea, same idea. I think it's a great strategy. I think it's a unique strategy because I do think the Mets, just look at their bullpen. A lot of the guys that they had on maybe 1-year deals, they burned them out a little bit. And so that could be a double-edged sword where it may turn off some relievers from wanting to go to the Mets, but that's the life of being a reliever. On the starting pitch and the position player side, it's great. I mean, there's some, starting pitchers that I looked at in the free agent market that might be one name I picked up, Casey Mize from the Tigers. I think is a free agent. Former first-round pick. He may be the type of guy that Casey Mize, they gave him a deal, and he, again, is trying to reestablish himself and has a big year. And then he goes out and hits the market and signs somewhere else for a lot more. But I think those 1-year deals are really smart.
There's something to be said about becoming a destination to fix yourself. And we see the Atlanta Braves have become that for some pitchers, and they have the magic touch. The Astros were that for a bit. So if you find a way to continue to get these guys on low stakes deals and have them outperform and then create them, and then, I mean, if you can get another Severino or a Manaea performance from somebody else, like you're saying, maybe it's Casey Mize, or maybe it's someone we're not even talking about right now, the Mets would be in a really good spot. And let's be honest, David Stearns has the acumen and the intelligence and the background to, I think everyone's trusting his gut, if we're going with that, for finding these hidden gems across the market.
Yeah, and I know that that Soto's going to be the big ticket. There's a lot of free agents out there, especially starting pitching. I think the Mets know what they did this year with getting what they did at Quintana, even though it was an up and down year. Manaea and Severino, you can't bank on that. Those were the Severino Manaea things. That was great. I mean, they fixed themselves. They were dominant at times. Sometimes the best pitchers in the league in certain little stretches, a couple weeks here and there. You're not going to get that every single time. Every once in a while, Adrian Hauser is going to have a 6 ERA, and that didn't work. So it's a risk. But you do have to get Kodai Senga back and healthy and have a few more consistent ace-like 2-3 starter arms out there. And who knows how they deal with that. I know that just David Stearns' history in Milwaukee, it also was Milwaukee never loved to give out the long-term deal to pitchers. That's just his thing. Who knows if that changes here, because he has more money than he's ever played with before in the baseball world.
So before we float too far away from Pete Alonso, just a hypothetical out there in Yankee land. Obviously, they're coming up with these, let's be honest, backup plans. If the Soto thing doesn't work out and say he winds up going to Los Angeles, there's conversation there. Maybe he winds up going to the Mets. If Pete Alonso finds himself in the Yankee brand of pinstripes, will there be some upset Met fans? Like what I know you have the finger on the pulse, but would Mets fans begrudge Pete Alonso for putting on that Yankee uniform and playing across town?
Yeah, I tell you what, just the business of this, I find it so fascinating. I mean, the kid in me loves Pete Alonso hitting walk-off home runs, because that means we get to call walk-off home runs all the time. That's what we want. But where the Mets were, they offered him that deal last year at the All-Star game, which was right there with the Matt Olson deals and the Freddie Freemans, and here's what the market says for first baseman. And Pete said no. He bet on himself. had a not so great year during the regular season. And there were times this year, I mean, Mets fans will tell you, you guys will probably feel the same way through, June and July. You thought, all right, maybe he just won't be here. I mean, he's not putting together that 40 and 120 type year that we're used to seeing. And so now he goes to free agency. Mets want him back. He wants to be back, but the Mets are in the position where if he goes and signs somewhere else, you can tell that we had a deal for you. This was the number. You wanted a little bit more. Then his reputation may be a little bit tarnished. Who knows what happens? But if he goes to the Yankees, that's a battle I don't want to have to get into until we get into. But that would be quite a decision. I think he's smart enough to know that unless they offer him the world and a half, he probably shouldn't go to the Yankees. But again, who knows? I mean, that really would be nuts. And for the Yankees, if they're not going to spend an arm and a leg on Soto, what's cheaper than a right fielder for $500 million? A first baseman, maybe overvalued, could be Pete Alonso.
And looking to 2025, we're talking about free agency, potentially trades, and who's going to be there and who's not. But the Mets do have a nice crop of young talent that seems to be ready to make an impact right now. Brett Beatty, we talk about, Ronnie Mauricio, Luis Angel Acuna, Drew Gilbert, Brandon Sproat. What are your expectations from seeing these players on the field, maybe opening day or maybe sometime middle of the year?
Yeah, so I think, the number one thing is if Pete leaves, which again, it's 50-50, maybe it's a little bit more that he leaves than stays. You have Mark Vientos probably being your first baseman in 2025, which I think from an offensive standpoint, everybody's on board with that. So that opens up third base. And I really think Ronnie Mauricio is the third baseman of the future. I think that's the spot he belongs in for the Mets. What he did in just a few weeks span at the end of 22 or 23, however long ago that feels, was amazing. And then he just basically got hurt in a freak accident, trying to steal second base, towards ACL, which was tough. So I think he could be your third baseman, depending on how his health is. The Mets are still not giving up on Brett Beatty, not that they should be, but they've certainly moved off of him. I mean, his stock was down majorly last year, or this year, 2024. So going into 25, though, I think that they love the way he adapted to second base at AAA. Maybe second base isn't the thing for him, but he's adaptable. He could play the outfield for you. I think they love his bat. I know teams were interested around trade deadline time for him, so there are other teams that find value in him. I don't think the Mets should give up on him yet. And I do think that, we talk about Harrison Bader having left. If Drew Gilbert didn't get hurt this year and really spent the majority of the season on the IL, Bader was the stopgap to get to Drew Gilbert as a starting center fielder next year. So he'll be around. I think Luis Angel Acuna will be around as a middle infielder backup for Lindor and McNeil. So, offensively and position player wise, pretty good. From a starting pitcher standpoint, Brandon Sproat, he was phenomenal last year. Blade Tidwell, his name popped up a lot. There are still some starting pitcher names that, Mike Vassell, Dom Hamill didn't take great steps last year. That's why I do think maybe outside of Soto, starting pitcher is going to be a huge free agency thing for David Stearns, because I think position player wise, the Mets are a little bit more ahead of the game than they are pitching wise right now.
The infield's fascinating because there's so many of these moving pieces and potential different moves. If Pete Alonso is back, it changes everything. And obviously there's less open spots. You mentioned McNeil. Obviously his name always comes up in trade rumors, and maybe he won't be here next year. Other people, David Stern said he's very okay with having him as a starting second baseman next year, or maybe moves him to a corner outfield spot again or something like that. I've seen some other things too, as far as there was a rumor about the Mets be interested in Willy Adames and moving him to third base. And then obviously Jose Iglesias, does he have a place on this team? It seems like no, but obviously a fan favorite, a guy who grinds out at bats, a terrific fielder, and quite the clubhouse presence. What do you make of those two names, Willy Adames coming over and Jose Iglesias maybe finding a spot on this team again?
Yeah, so the Adames thing was interesting. The fact that he said just a couple, I guess, within the week that he would be interested or would move to third base, which does open possibilities up, not just for the Mets, but for his free agency all across the league. Adames had a great year, had a monster year in Milwaukee, which is what you expect from a guy who's going into his walk year. And anytime you hear about the Milwaukee Brewers, you should think about David Stearns because, Stearns was in Milwaukee and basically built that team, built Eduardo Brizuela, who's Stearns' number 2, was also a huge part of building the Brewers, and now they're building the Mets, those two guys. Willy Adames was terrific, and I think at third base, he's still agile enough. If you move him from short to third, you're getting a little bit more than just simply a slugging third baseman. You're getting more of a defensive third baseman. David Stearns always loves defense and run prevention, so I like that idea. You're not going to sign a shortstop because you have Francisco Lindor, but a shortstop playing third base, that's kind of like the Mauricio idea on a cheaper level, hoping that a shortstop playing third base, could be the future. So maybe Adames for third base. I think that's fine. But then Jose Iglesias, man, it's one of those things. It's like I love the story of the Mets with 2024 with Grimace and all the great memes and OMG. But sometimes those things are just shooting stars. I hate to say it. He was 34. He ran out of gas toward the end. It was an amazing thing. We'll always have Paris kind of thing with Jose Iglesias. We'll always have 2024 and OMG. I hate to look forward, but guys get older. I just don't want to sit there in May next year and he's playing, he's not doing well, and it just ends, and it should have ended a couple months ago. I don't know. But these things seem to be just kind of shooting stars.
So the focus has been on a lot of teams' radars, the big ticket free agents. We mentioned Juan Soto, but also Corbin Burns is out there. Roki Sasaki is going to be posted here. Of course, the Dodgers the favorite, but all big market teams are in there throwing money around. What are your thoughts on the trade market before we get into more about free agency for the Mets? Given the strength of their farm system, as we just mentioned before, do you think they have the pieces to make a big trade for a key player? Of course, they're going to make the mini trades all throughout on the way to opening day, but do you potentially see them out there to make one of these big moves? Maybe Garrett Crochet. We talked about Brent Rooker's out there potentially making moves with the guys that they have in the farm.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that. Those are so hard to predict because you really don't know who's talking and what they're talking about, what they're interested in. Those are hypotheticals that are very tough to really dive into seriously because, again, you have no idea. But I think David Stearns, we haven't seen yet that big trade value for value, at least with the Mets. I'd be very interested in seeing that. And if you hear David Stearns talking about Jeff McNeil or, wouldn't they trade McNeil? Why is he talking about how much he likes him here or there? Well, if you're talking about how much you like McNeil, how versatile he is, that sounds pretty good when you're on the phone with a team saying, we love him. He's so versatile. He's a lefty bat. He won the batting title. So those things are still strategic, even though maybe they do move somebody big in the offseason. It's just so hard to predict, and we haven't seen it yet from him because I think David wanted to see what the state of the Mets was this year. But the White Sox thing with Crochet is interesting. Those two don't seem to love each other very much, Garrett Crochet and the Chicago White Sox. So I think that in that particular case, sure, you could see a move. I just don't know the value for that yet. Brent Rooker, great outstanding player. Mets seem pretty okay at the corner outfield spots for right now. I know Marte's going into his final year. Who knows if Juan Soto's in right field, that you don't have to worry about Brent Rooker. But yeah, we haven't seen that kind of big trade yet from David Stearns.
So Devin and I had a conversation last week when the Dodgers made headlines saying they're going to be in on Juan Soto, and they are the favorites, as I mentioned, for Roki Sasaki. Is there a piece of you as a diehard baseball fan that looks at that and says something should be done to stop this deferring money to make sure you have room for all these things? Or is it bad for baseball in general to be hoarding talent 1 through 9 that they are in their lineup, and then on top of it, the rotation being filled with the Yamamotos of the world and also adding Roki Sasaki on top of it?
No, I don't think it's bad. I think everybody wants to be the Dodgers for a reason. I think they've done a pretty good job getting to this position. I mean, the Dodgers have been around for so long, going back to Brooklyn. If you look at the story of any team from beginning to where they are now, it's been up and down. I mean, the Dodgers were not so good for many years, and now they've been really, really good. And they're smart, with how they did their deal. I mean, Shohei Ohtani also basically just picked the Dodgers last year, whether they liked it or not. That was very LeBron James of him. Like, I'm going here. Okay, come on down, Shohei. And the same thing with Yoshinobu Yamamoto. I mean, if that's the free market of this game, is that if they want to play for a team, and that team is crushing it, they perform on the field. I mean, they've won, they've been in the playoffs for 10, 12 years in a row. just won another World Series. They are the envy of every team, farm system, and big league team. They're now dominating the Japanese, television market. Think about that $700 million contract for Ohtani, how much money they're going to make in simply merch that they sell to, fans in Japan. But there are so many roster spots you can have. There's a 40-man roster for a reason, 26-man big league roster. You can't have everybody. Eventually some of those deals will come calling, but the Dodgers also won with guys like Kike Hernandez, who went to Boston and was terrible and came back and was amazing again. So it's what they do with their analytics with their players that they already have that they double down on and are really good at. So I get the pain point, but I'm not against it. I'm not against breaking down a Dodgers team like that.
12.9 million people watched the World Series in Japan, which is the most watched fall classic in all of the nation's history. So there's something to it. And Roki Sasaki, it's a fit if he wants to go there, and who's to stop him? I think that's really, like you said, if you want to beat the Dodgers, beat them on the field.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think sports sometimes, as much as we hate it when we're not the fan of that team, when you have a big bad villain, it used to be the Yankees, I think sometimes that does increase viewership because you're waiting to watch someone to take them down. Just quickly back to the trade market, I wanted to talk about two other guys that, again, as a Met fan, these are two guys that jump out at me. The bullpen. We saw a very shaky Edwin Diaz. When he's great, he's great, and he looks like he's unhittable. And then the next night he comes out and he's either going to walk the first two guys or give up a bomb. And I feel like that's what we've watched other than that one insanely dominant year before the injury. Ryan Helsley, Devin Williams, the Milwaukee connection with Devin Williams. Just to give me your thought on those guys, specifically Williams with the Stearns connection.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting seeing that. I mean, Milwaukee, though they make the playoffs every year, they just don't have the funds to, pay these guys, which is just a shame for you talk about all the money the Dodgers have. The Brewers need a little bit more to pay some guys to keep them around because Devin Williams is filthy. I mean, the changeup that Pete Alonso hit was the only home run on a changeup that Devin Williams gave up all year. Like I still can't believe the Mets rallied to do that against him. He's great. If the Mets could get him in a deal, absolutely. I would be for that. If you talk about Edwin Diaz, I think it's really interesting. Whenever a guy has a down year, the stock is low. I think that's the wrong time to give up on him because, certainly it wasn't a great year for Edwin, but you're just about to get the guy's bounce back. I mean, that's the only place to go is up. So I think, people talk about trading Edwin or this and that. I mean, it's going to be hard to do with his contract. I think Edwin will be fine. There's certain things he has to figure out how to pitch with, but yeah, Helsley had a great year in St. Louis, but Devin Williams, if you can get him, man, he's the real deal.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be personally playing GM for a minute. I'd want Williams with Diaz. I wouldn't want to move Diaz off because just a little more protection there. Williams has done the setup there before behind a dominant closer and Hader. So I think as long as he's willing to go to the eighth inning, that'd be interesting. You just want to make the game short, having guys like that at the back end. To me, the X factor on this team, no matter what happens off season, is the guy the pitchers are throwing to. Francisco Alvarez. I find him to be just such a key. The pitchers read about throwing to him this year. The passion is there, and it's exciting to watch. I think we were a little frustrated and sometimes baffled with the bat this year. We just expected more. I think fans get a little upset when he's in a slump because it looks like he's swinging for the moon every time, and it just makes it look worse. Do you expect him to make some adjustments offensively? I think of Vientos, how he kind of changed some things, and suddenly I've been said a few times, we need Alvarez to go to the school of Mark Vientos this year, wherever that may be, to kind of make similar changes. Your thoughts on Alvarez?
Yeah, I love Francisco. He just has such game-changing power. I saw when I was in Brooklyn when he was there when he was 19. I mean, he feasts on the big moment. I mean, you can tell. My favorite part about Alvy is when he takes he wants a fastball on 0-0 and someone hangs a breaking ball and he swings out of his shoes. And everybody could tell that first pitch was not going to be a fastball. And he tucks his bat under his armpit and he motors out of the box, takes a deep breath, and he motors back in. He just wants that moment. He'll get to that point where he'll slow the game down enough. He just has to work on pitch recognition and thinking, what is this guy trying to do to me? that game, that chess game, I think is more of a strategy thing. I think it's more of a practice thing. When he got hurt in LA and missed, all that time with the banged up hand, he came back and he felt like, he felt like the shadow of all the home runs he hit last year, he had to get to that point. So he put this insane amount of pressure on his plate. And I think he was battling himself in those moments to try to do too much. And that's the thing that I've always heard about him and I've seen about him, whether it's catching or hitting. He wants so much responsibility. And from a certain leadership standpoint, he has that responsibility. He's terrific at commanding the pitching staff. Offensively, he's a catcher who can give you so much at the plate. Pitch recognition is his big thing. And we know you want to hit the ball 450 feet. You have to try to game the pitcher to give you what you want in those moments. And I think at 22 years old, it's going to take a second, but once he finds that, once he learns the cat and mouse game, he's going to be insanely dangerous at the plate.
And I look at Alvarez as a tale of to be patient with some of these prospects. The post hype is real for some of these guys. You mentioned Brett Beatty and some of the frustration from Mets fans and seeing what he could be and what he's not yet. I mean, the same frustrations were there with Alvarez a few years ago. So it's about being patient and recognizing the raw skills. Because clearly, as you said, watching him in Brooklyn at 19 years old, he's always had those raw skills. It's about tuning them. And it seems like the Mets have the infrastructure now to really cultivate the talent. And that's the beautiful thing to see here, because you see the best organizations that win consistently, they have all those pieces that can really take the raw talent and take it to the next level. And it feels like Alvarez did that this year in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, they always keep reminding us he's only 22 years old, and that's true. He is, and when you get a little bit of success, I mean, he hit 20 plus bombs in 2023. When you get that little bit of success, and then you come in the next year, hey, I'm going to do that again, and you don't, that weighted pressure adds on you. And these are human beings. I mean, he wants to put on a show for the Citi Field fans. That's why he's taking a daddy hack on thinking he's going to put the ball into LaGuardia Airport. Those are real things. I mean, that's what you're seeing is what's going on. I mean, that connection is there. You're not just thinking, why is he slowing the game down? He's trying, and that'll all come. But again, he has leaders in that room. I mean, the hitters room this year with Lindor. I mean, I remember a situation with Lindor in spring training last year. It was a live AB against Eric Orzi at Port St. Lucie in front of two people. And Lindor was at the plate, and he was basically talking Eric Orzi through, I just swung at this pitch on this part of the plate. I took this pitch on this part of the plate. What do you think I'm doing? Where do you think I'm going? That school that happened is, these guys are thinking steps ahead, pitches ahead. They'll take a pitch in a spot because they think, oh, he's not looking. I mean, there's so many things going on. And so with Alvarez, just by pure osmosis, stays around those guys. He'll pick up on how to hit, how to recognize pitches, how to understand what the pitcher's trying to do in those moments. And because we see the power is there. He just has to basically find the right, hitting is hard. And so you have to find the right science behind it.
So Devin did mention him by name before. And of course we have to talk about Mark Vientos. He might be the principal of that school that Alvarez is attending or whatever he had said before, but however you want to put it, he's seen as a cornerstone piece for the Mets at this point. Do you see them locking him up long-term, similar to what the Braves have done with some of their younger stars with these team-friendly deals, but kind of giving them security for their families, a little bit unproven for the long-term, but it makes sense financially. Like you said, Braves are famous for it, but a lot of the teams are doing it. Team-friendly deals are kind of in vogue right now.
Yeah, that's a unique thing because I was just thinking about if Mark Vientos is a third baseman, and he reaches free agency, his price point will be here. If he goes to first base and he reaches free agency, his price point will be a little bit lower than that, which is unique for Mark Vientos. So I think the Mets would be wise to lock up Alvarez on a 10-year, $50 million K-Bay Ruiz type deal or something. Braves, as you mentioned, Steve, are really, really good at this. I think that's a smart idea. For Vientos, I think you just want to wait and see, and he's going to want to wait and see about what position he plays. And if he stays at third base and he gets better defensively at third base, then absolutely. But the Mets have held on to Mark Vientos so many times for the last few years. All these trade talks at deadline time when he was in the minor leagues, they would not trade him. They would not let him go. And that was a beautiful decision, obviously, as we saw this year.
We can talk about players all day, and honestly, on and more. I have a broadcasting question for you. With the pitch clock, was that a big change for you guys calling games as far as just less time in between to kind of talk about certain things casually, where you're kind of having to go next pitch to next pitch a little quicker?
Yeah, so I had the pitch clock in the minor leagues the last 2 years. So I had the rhythm down of getting in and out of these ideas. And I will say, Howie last year when it was introduced struggled with it. I mean, you went from, and I have to say that the major league game was egregiously long between pitches. I mean, some of those clips that would go around, 30 seconds between pitches, please. And so, Howie in the beginning would really struggle to. He said, I remember we were in Miami that opening weekend. This is like a hockey game I'm calling. So you learn how to pace yourself a little bit, how to pull back. But that's because you used to filling 4 hours of time. Now you're filling 2 hours and 50 minutes of time, which is great. The worst part is the storytelling is huge. Especially how he's talking about a great story from days of old, and he always jokes, you never tell a story with 2 outs and 2 strikes, but sometimes those innings, David Peterson gets 2 ground balls to short, and you're like, why did I start this story? The pitch clock hurts in those moments.
Do you think the pitch clock is really just because there are numbers that came out for 9-inning MLB games lasting 3+ hours, and we see the numbers as far as percentage goes. In 2017, 59% of the games had gone above 3 hours, and now we're down to 8% of the games in 2024. A big jump from 2022 to 2023 from 57% to 13%. Is there something else in the game outside the pitch clock? Because that's the obvious thing to point to. But do you think there's maybe a different strategy for teams that we've seen a jump down to 8% of games, which is, to me, I mean, that's a huge jump. That's what MLB and Manfred had wanted all along. They want these games to be digestible, and they want people to be able to get in and get out of the park and be able to enjoy the moments instead of sitting there for a 4.5-hour slog.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I'm on some of those calls with MLB that they're broadcasting meetings with probably local TV or radio about things that they're doing to speed up the game, and they're constantly listening to what people want, and they want not only shorter games but shorter dead time. And I think the pitch clock was so good at that. And I realized when it was good is that we didn't have to eliminate any innings from the game. We kept keep it 9 innings. It's just when you have a tough time like looking at your phone between pitches because it's that fast, like that's the sweet spot. I think they got it perfectly in that regard. And what was really, they hate dead time, they hate commercials. When we went to London, the both teams, Phillies and the Mets, got an extra man, 26th man for their roster. It could not be a pitcher. It had to be a position player. As they were on the world stage, MLB did not want another pitching change because you had an extra pitcher. They're the worst. Fans hate that. And so you have to listen. I mean, this is the entertainment industry. The Dodgers want to make sure they have a good product so that they can make enough money to pay Shohei Ohtani $700 million. It's a give and take. It is a business. You have to be able to react to, fans that want shorter games and get kids in bed early, but also cut the dead time between pitches. And now the game it moves. You don't really change the game. Certainly the pickoffs, the disengagements change the game a little bit, but it's in a good spot right now. Pitch clock. I really think the pitch clock is maybe the thing that saves baseball. I don't know if that's hyperbolic to say, but I think it changed the game for the better.
Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, just for example, I mean, I know Devin and I were talking about the different rule changes being workshopped, and not only the independent leagues you mentioned working for the Long Island Ducks and the Atlantic League. A lot of that stuff is being workshopped down there, and we're seeing in the minor leagues there is conversation about challenging balls and strikes. I know that the Arizona Fall League, we're thinking about implementing that for next year. What are your thoughts on some of the other stuff they're doing? There's some unique things they're doing. We saw the base size that started there. I mean, baseball is trying to be as progressive as ever. I think they're drawing from the NBA playbook of trying to advance the game and really entice the young fan, as we're saying, outside of just making it a shorter game, making it more exciting.
Yeah, I think I was a couple of years before there was one year the Atlantic League, they were going to move the mounds back 6 inches or a foot or something like that. And poor grounds crew members all over the country had to figure out how the hell am I going to move this mound back a foot in the middle of July. That didn't really work out because they thought pitching was too dominant. But the thing that is coming, the next thing that it'll be here will be the ABS system, the automated balls and strikes system. The baseball trialed it out with, do we want a challenge system? Do we want an ABS system? At AAA, you'd have the umpire would for 3 games would basically call the game, and then you could challenge his strike zone. Versus the next 3 days was just the computer calling the zone, and that back and forth, they decided that probably the ABS challenge will morph into you'll be watching a Met game. And I think they do this because the strike zone on TV, we're all umpires sitting at home watching the game. If we're calling it a strike and the computer's calling it a strike, why isn't it a strike? The ABS system is there to help that out, but they don't want the computer to call every single pitch. When the game is 8-0, the zone should expand. When there are different times where the strike zone should change a little bit depending on where you are in the game. You will see a challenge system though relatively soon. 3 for each team. Hitter's up there, takes a pitch. There's only 3 challenges for the team for the game. Is you get a challenge, a ball or a strike call. He's got to do it in 2 seconds. Pitcher can do it. Catcher can do it. I think that is coming, and it's going to be great because some of these calls. I mean, you saw in the World Series, they didn't even select the umpires that were rated at the top, 5 or 6. Mm-hmm. Which is frustrating because we want a meritocracy. I'm really good at my job. I had a great year. I want to be rewarded at the end of the year.
Right.
So there were a couple of calls that we're all watching going, why is he back there? And so I think the challenge system will at least get us to a playing field. It's not a total computer. It's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, the ABS, it kind of reminds me of like the tennis, which has been doing it for a long time now with the serves, and they just quickly, put their finger up, challenge it, and everyone can see for themselves really quickly on the big screen, and they move on. So Keith, you've given us a ton of time tonight, and we really, really appreciate it. We're going to try to get you out of here on this last question. Just looking back at this last season, or maybe these last 2 seasons for you, what has been the most rewarding moment for you personally in the position that you are for the New York Mets?
Oof. I mean, there are so many of them, and I say that because every single day walking into Citi Field, that's where I go to work. That's pretty cool. I never thought that would happen. I think truly at the end of the season this year, the best part is people. We don't really hear feedback. I mean, you hear it from the bosses sometimes. You hear it from your wife all the time. You hear it from the fans sometimes, but and you never take Twitter for life and death. But there are a lot of people that just you never heard from on Twitter talking about how wonderful the ride was to listen to Howie and myself and Pat McCarthy, of course, for the playoff run and for the end of the year, and how you are. Basically, how you're their best friend. I think Mike Francesa said this on the radio, years and years ago. Baseball is your best friend. It's there for you every single day. Good day, bad day, 7:00. There's the Met game. You can listen to it for 3 hours. And on radio, we get a chance to be, part of the vehicle to get you to your best friend. So you really spend some intimate time with people. And so it was just nice hearing from a lot of fans at the end of the year that don't tweet at us all the time or ever. That just said, hey, I've been listening all year and just thank you because 2024, we talk about it. We want to hold on to it. Grimace, OMG, the magic of the NLCS. Yes, it was here, but now it's gone and it becomes a memory. And to be part of that memory for people is great because when I grew up listening to games on the radio, that's the memory I created. It was amazing listening to Howie Rose or Gary Cohen, but really it's where you were with your mom or your dad when you were a young kid at the time. That's what you remember is not how did the call come out. Maybe you do, but you remember where you were when in that part of your life. And that was really, really rewarding to be that for some people this year because, getting into this business, that's all I wanted to do is maybe one day I'll be a trusted voice for a team. And for a couple of weeks at the end of the year, I guess we were.
So as Devin said, we're going to try to get you out of here, but any plans as you have this well-deserved offseason for some rest of all the travel you did for those months for the baseball season? What are you up to for the winter months, staying warm here?
Yeah, so I have a 1-year-old daughter, my little redhead Charlotte, and I had to walk in and say, "Remember me? I'm your father." After the end of the year, so that was nice. But yeah, it's a long season. It starts in mid-February. It ended, late October, and it's a lot of nights away from family and friends. So I'll jump on SNY a bunch, be an NY baseball night in New York, some of their hot stove shows, do a little basketball on the side, but basically just rest, recharge, see all the people that you couldn't come to their barbecue or their wedding during the season, and then hit the ground running in St. Lucie in February. So that's what I'm most excited for, is just a little R&R and a lot of diaper changing and cutting up bananas for my yogurt in the morning for her to go to daycare and all that stuff.
So you guys make sure to follow Keith on X at Keith_Raad. That's 2 A's in Rad, RAAD, and catch all his tweets and interact with him. Give him a follow on Twitter, have a conversation to bridge this gap from now. The longest winter is always without baseball. But Keith, it's been a pleasure. We hope to have you on again soon, maybe sometime during the season, and have more conversations about the New York Mets.
All right, Steve and Devin, so good to talk to you.
All right, we so appreciate Keith for hopping on here and talking all things New York Mets. Devin, we could have went another hour talking about it. I feel like we just touched the tip of the iceberg about the Mets 2024 and their 2025 season to be.
Yeah, there's really so much to get into, and we squeezed in. Really, when we were typing up the questions, I think we thought like we might have too much here, but Keith gave us a ton of time, which is amazing. And there's so much to look forward to. The offseason is just getting started. I found his take on the Juan Soto stuff pretty fascinating. I just haven't heard that angle yet, where he said as long as Lindor and Soto can be okay, kind of the alphas of the group, right? It immediately made me think of this moment from years ago. It might have been Lindor's first or second year, because Soto was still a national, and someone buzzed Lindor up really high and tight, might have even hit his helmet, and Lindor went down in a heap. And obviously everyone runs onto the field. There's a little dust up. And I remember Soto ran right over to Lindor as the opponent and put his arm around him, and you could hear him with the mics or something for some reason, asking him if he's okay. So when Keith said, I hope that they would work well together, and that came into my head and gave me a little hope. Like, well, yeah, I think they have a good relationship. That's just a little thing I remember. Who knows? But I thought that was an interesting take, not one that I had thought of before.
No, I don't think a lot of people consider that with these big free agents. You assume that they would fit in seamlessly, and that's something that I'm sure front offices consider. But I think Juan Soto would fit perfectly in that lineup. Begrudgingly on my end, I think I would rather have him in the Bronx. But I think for a generational player that is still in the prime of his career, maybe not even reached his peak yet, the Mets will find room for him if Stevie Cohen wants to throw the bag at him. But I mean, Brian Cashman's quote, and we're not going to get too far into it, but Brian Cashman's quotes that he had said, he seemed pretty damn confident that Juan Soto is going to be a Yankee. So we'll see. It seems like he will sign in Texas during the winter meeting. So we have to wait until a month from now to really see where Juan Soto will play for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, honestly, I think we said something similar to this in the beginning of the season, where we know the Mets have the means to be the best offer, but when you kind of read the tea leaves, it makes it seem like as long as the Yankees offer is respectable and pretty close, that he'll stay there. So I think we said this in the beginning of the season, like it's possible, but I think Steve Cohen would have to kind of blow him out of the water. And there have been reports that saying they're already being very aggressive, like the first ones to contact him. So I don't know. I go back and forth as a Met fan of like, I think he's coming here. I don't think he's coming here. I said at the end of the season, I think he's going to be a Yankee again. That's where my hunch is. But as a Boris guy, and Boris coming off, as Keith mentioned, a terrible offseason last year, if the Mets offer is well above the Yankees offer and other teams' offers, that might be where he goes. I don't know. It's very unpredictable, I guess, at this point. I even heard someone on TV earlier saying they think the Phillies are going to get him. Like, this guy was adamant. Like, he has guys there he's played with, like Bryce Harper and Trey Turner. Obviously, the front office is very motivated after the failure they had this year to kind of get back up there. So who knows, man? Anything's possible.
So, and again, I don't want to ignite a further conversation.
It's
but
hard not to.
just want your thoughts on this, because it feels like he did everything possible to have his best possible moment. Of course, granting the Yankees to get to the World Series with that huge hit in Cleveland. But there's something about that feels like he will be the belle of the ball, but it doesn't feel like there's as much sheen that I thought would be on him. Do you feel that way? Because it feels like even Yankee fans, maybe it's coping, maybe it's something different. Like, people are coming up with these backup contingency plans that I never thought Yankee fans would settle for, but I'm seeing it. I mean, you guys can find conversations in Yankee universe that people are like, yeah, we'll probably be a better team without him. Like, that's a conversation that would have been unbelievable in July.
I have a take on this, and to be honest, I'm very confident in this take. They're protecting their own emotions. They're already kind of trying to get to a point of acceptance before it happens, and then they'll be thrilled if that doesn't happen, then Soto is back. I've seen a ton of that too. I've even heard a guy on the radio today not just say like, this should be our backup plan, just straight up say, you know what, I think we should forget about Soto and go this way, like not even try. So I think that is the way, like you said, kind of coping ahead of time, like getting ahead of it, so they're, not completely taken aback if he signs somewhere else. Yeah, I think we do that as humans, not just sport fans. When you feel something that might be coming that doesn't go your way, start to try to prepare yourself emotionally. And it's not an excuse they're making, but it's unique to sports, I guess, the way they're doing it.
So we're going to get out of here on that. We really appreciate you guys joining us, listen to. And again, I want to thank Keith Raad for all the time he gave us talking about the New York Mets. You guys can check him out on Twitter. And of course, listen to him on WCBS 880. He was the soundtrack to everyone's summer. If you're driving in the car, listening to Met games, guess what? Keith was accompanying you. And you guys support us, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Tablesetters Pod for all the exclusive updates, behind the scenes content. Of course, all those amazing interactive fan polls that Devin keeps posting on the X Machine. We'll be back next week. Who knows if we have a guest, but we'll certainly have a lot of hot stove conversation to have. And we'll talk to you after a while.
In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.